questions. Question 1, you get a text from your BCBA letting you know that they will be supervising your next session with your client and that they would like you to help them with a functional assessment. Is this acceptable? As we know, our primary role as RBTs is what? Well, it's to implement plans, right? Your BCBA is going to design plans. They're going to train you on plans. As an RBT, it is your job to implement. When we start talking about other tasks, such as parent training or assessments, what is your role as an RBT in those? Well, your role is going to be to assist or help with those tasks. So your supervisor telling you that they're going to be supervising your next session and that they would like you to help them with the functional assessment, is this okay? A, no, you are not allowed to help with functional assessments as an RBT. Well, we know that's incorrect because we just talked about that, right? RBTs assist BCBAs in whatever the BCBA needs help with the client, right? Parent training, functional assessments, data collection, etc. Okay, you're there to assist, you're there to help. B, no, functional assessments should only happen before services begin. Well, functional assessments should absolutely happen before services begin, okay? But ongoing assessment is crucial to good service. We need to see what has changed with our client since service started. Now, our data is going to tell us a lot of that, but in addition to the data we're collecting, okay, we need to do ongoing preference assessments and ongoing functional assessments even after service begins. So B is wrong. C, yes, nothing is wrong with the scenario. Yeah, right? Everything's acceptable. Your BCBA texting you is fine. Them supervising you is fine. And then them asking you to help with the functional assessment is totally appropriate. Everything in the scenario is appropriate, is acceptable, nothing wrong. C looks like our best answer. What about D? Not enough information. No, plenty of information. Okay. C is going to be our best answer. Kind of a tricky ethical question, right? Typically with ethical questions, we're looking for what's wrong ethically. In this case, nothing. Okay. Good example of reading the question carefully and answering the question based on given information. Okay. This is a totally normal scenario. You should pick C. Yes, nothing is wrong with this scenario. 2, which of the following options is a characteristic of discontinuous measurement? What 3 types of measurement do we want to know as RBTs? We want to know continuous measurement, we want to know discontinuous measurement, and we want to know permanent product. Each have their own characteristics, each have advantages, each have disadvantages. The question is asking about discontinuous measurement. What do you know about discontinuous measurement? You should know we aren't capturing every instance of behavior. You should know it's good for group settings. You should know it's less accurate than continuous measurement. So using those 3 facts, let's try to answer our question, okay? We've attacked our question. Now let's get to the answer choices. A, it is best used in one-on-one situations. Well, in one-on-one situations where you have resources, you have time, continuous measurement is typically going to be a better option in most cases because you can capture every instance of behavior. Discontinuous measurement doesn't capture every instance of behavior. So A is wrong. B, you will capture every instance of behavior when using discontinuous measurement. Again, we know that's incorrect, right? Discontinuous measurement by design doesn't capture every instance of behavior. C, discontinuous measurement is as accurate as continuous measurement. Not necessarily, right? In some cases, if things go perfectly right and there's not a lot of topographies to the behavior, it's a very low rate behavior, maybe. But in most cases, discontinuous measurement is not going to be as accurate as continuous measurement because discontinuous measurement is only taking a sample of the bigger picture. So that leaves us with D, behaviors may be underestimated when using discontinuous measurement. Yes, right? If we're using, let's say, a whole interval data collection system, we might underestimate how often that behavior is actually occurring. So a characteristic of discontinuous measurement is discontinuous measurement might underestimate certain behaviors. You want to teach your little brother how to play horseshoes. The goal is to get the horseshoe as close to the stake in the ground as possible. You draw a line 10 feet from the stake and tell your brother to hit the line. You move the line closer and closer to the stake until your brother is able to hit the stake. What are you doing in relation to your brother's behavior? Before you even read the answer choices, what is your prediction? Okay. What are we doing in this scenario? We want our brother to throw this horseshoe and get to the stake. That is our desired behavior. First, we draw a line 10 feet from the stake, have our brother hit the line. Then we move it closer, 5 feet, hit the line, and now we want them to hit the stake the full distance. What would you consider moving the stake 10 feet and 5 feet? I would consider those successive approximations, right? We're getting closer and closer to our desired behavior, which is hitting the stake, right? And we're reinforcing as we get closer to that behavior, we're reinforcing those successive approximations. So when we reinforce the approximations, what are we doing? Are we task chaining? Well, no, right? Because our behavior of hitting the stake, we're not teaching the steps to it. We're just reinforcing closer and closer responses that are closer to our behavior. Okay, so this is not a task chain. Are we shaping? Yes, shaping is reinforcing successive approximations. When you're studying, try to attack the questions, try to predict the answers before you get to your answer choices. You want to spend most of your time on the question. Okay, read the question as carefully as you need to understand it before you jump into the answer choices. What you want to avoid is reading the question, jumping to the answers, saying, oh, let me go back and reread it, reading the question again, going back to the answers, reading the question again, doing that dance where you're jumping from the question to the answer choices. Read the question carefully enough the first time to really process and understand the information, and then get to your answer choices. So B, shaping, looks like our answer. What about punishing? Well, clearly you don't want to be punishing his behavior. We're trying to increase this behavior and teach this behavior. Either way, we don't know what's happening with the behavior as far as punishment and reinforcement goes. Okay, so we can't say punishing either way. And then D, differential reinforcement of other behavior. Are we reinforcing in the absence of a behavior? No, we're differentially reinforcing as he engages in the correct behavior of getting closer to the stake until he actually hits the stake. So we're reinforcing successive approximations. We are B, shape. Put the following items in the correct order: motivating operation, punishment, response, and prompt. In ABA, we have our 3-term contingency. You might know that as the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence, or the SRS. To that contingency, we can add a couple of certain antecedents like prompts and motivating operations. This question wants to know, what is the right order for all these different terms? What order do they occur in? A, MO, prompt, response, punishment. Now, it's a little confusing because what are we missing? We're missing the SD, right? Typically, it's going to be SD, response, consequence. There is no SD, which makes it a little harder. So you need to ask yourself, does the MO come before the prompt? Yes. Does the prompt come before the response? Yes. Does the response come before the consequence? Yes. So, is A in the right order? It would appear so. Let's look at the rest of our answer choices. B, punishment, MO, response, prompt. Ask yourself, does the consequence come before the motivating operation? No. The motivating operation is an antecedent. The motivating operation comes before the SD, so it certainly comes before the consequence. C, motivating operation, response, prompt, punishment. Does the motivating operation come before the response? Yes. Does the response come before the prompt? No. Big one. Prompt comes before response, always. Big error, common error that people make is prompting after the response. The prompt always, always, always comes before the response. And then D, response, MO, prompt, punishment. Does the response come before the MO? No. The MO comes before the response. The actual order is going to be motivating operation, discriminative stimuli, or the SD, prompt, response, consequence. That is our real order. So A is going to be our answer: MO, prompt, response, punishment. Kind of a tricky question without the SD in there, right? You really have to be careful. You have to slow down and think about it. Okay, so if you got that question right, good for you. You're definitely on the right track. You have a client that engages in escape maintain behavior. This behavior happens at a very high rate. If you are putting together a task chain, what strategy might be best to use with this client? It's a very specific answer to this question. You might know it, you might not. Let's assume we don't immediately know it. Let's walk ourselves through this question. Our client engages in escape maintain behavior. So what is typically going to happen with our client? We also know this behavior happens at a very high rate. So if we give them work, what are they going to do? Try to escape. If we give them a demand, what are they going to do? Try to escape. So we want to put together a task chain. Let's just say for hand washing. What's going to happen if you tell them to wash their hands? Well, they will probably engage in some sort of escape behavior if this happens at a very high rate. We want to prevent this. How will we do that? What type of chaining will we use? Well, we know we're not going to use total task chaining because total task chaining is essentially teaching the entire chain all at once. And if they engage in escape maintain behavior, okay, reinforcement might be very delayed. So we're going to avoid that. Behavior chain interruption strategy, when we intentionally disrupt the chain, might evoke escape behavior. So we might try to avoid that at first. That leaves us with forward chaining and backwards chaining. The question becomes, when is reinforcement delivered? Well, in forward chaining, okay, reinforcement is delivered after the first step is done properly, and then you still need to complete the rest of the chain. Backwards chaining, reinforcement is delivered at the end of the chain. So escape functions as the reinforcer. Therefore, if you have a client, that engages in escape maintain behavior, then backwards chaining is going to be your best choice because backwards chaining uses escape as reinforcement. That last step is reinforced and you help them through the rest. So if you're teaching backwards, or if you were teaching hand washing using backwards chaining, you would bring your client to the sink, you would help them do the whole task, and then they would do the last step. And as soon as they complete that last step, they're free. Escape has maintained, or escape has reinforced that behavior. Okay, so if you have a client that engages in escape maintain behavior, backwards chaining might be the best to use if you're doing a task chain. A proper behavior chain interruption strategy involves what? So a continuation kind of last question. We're now looking at a behavior chain interruption strategy. This is something that you probably don't see often. We don't really talk about it often, but it's a good strategy for evoking novel behaviors or just teaching different ways to approach a task chain. What can happen is if we teach a behavior using a task chain, we end up teaching the client there's only one way to complete a behavior. And if anything goes wrong in that task chain, the behavior is not getting completed. The purpose of a behavior chain interruption strategy is to avoid that. This is saying, okay, we have our certain way of doing a task, but if something interrupts you or something in the chain changes, we can make modifications and complete it a different way. So if we're going to properly implement the behavior chain interruption strategy, what are we going to do? A, reinforce the first step in the chain and then prompt your client through the rest. What does that sound like? That's going to be forward chaining. B, changing a step in the middle of your client engaging in a task chain. Yes, this is what you're doing, okay? In the middle of that task chain, you are changing a step or interrupting that chain and forcing your client to adapt or engage in a different response to complete the chain. B looks like our best answer. C, teaching the entire task chain to your client. No, that is going to be total task chaining. And then D, breaking down a behavior into teachable steps. That is a task analysis. Our answer here is going to be B, changing a step in the middle of your client engaging in a task chain. Which of the following reinforcement schedules is based on an average amount of time passing? There are some keywords here. We're dealing with basic reinforcement schedules. If you're just learning basic reinforcement schedules, start by breaking them down into parts. Ask yourself first, am I dealing with responses or am I dealing with time? If I'm dealing with responses, I'm dealing with a ratio schedule. If I'm dealing with time, I'm dealing with an interval schedule. This question says we're dealing with time passing, so we're dealing with intervals. We can eliminate what? We can eliminate VR3. DRA is a type of differential reinforcement, but it's not telling us anything about our actual reinforcement schedule, so we can eliminate D as well. That leaves us with A and B, FI2, VI1. So we know we're dealing with time. Now ask yourself, is my schedule fixed? Is it staying the same? Is it constant? Or is it an average? Is it varying? Well, we know our schedule is based on an average amount, so we're looking for a variable average, amount of time, interval, schedule. Go to our answer choices, VI1, variable interval 1. Break them down. If you are still studying, if you're still learning, break them down like that until you get comfortable. Once you get comfortable, you'll be able to read this question and answer it in no time. Okay. But before you get to that point, break down these reinforcement schedules step by step, part by part. Each time you say to your class, take out your math textbooks, John says, take out your math textbooks. John is doing what? What kind of behavior is John engaging in? Is John mocking you? Well, would we ever measure the behavior of mocking? No, right? Because that's going to be hard to observe, hard to measure. Mocking is going to look very different to very different people. Additionally, John is doing something very specific, right? Each time you say to your class, take out your math textbooks, John copies exactly what you says. So what is this considered? This is going to be B in echoic. When the listener copies what the speaker says, they engage in an echoic. B looks like our best answer. Read all your answer choices. C, engaging in a tangible seeking behavior. Is there any indication John is looking for a tangible? No. The only thing we know is John is copying exactly what the teacher is saying. He's engaging in an echoic. And then D, engaging in automatic behavior. What is automatic behavior? Automatic behavior is when it happens with the single person or by yourself, not socially mediated, not socially evoked. This is very clearly a social behavior, socially evoked by the teacher. Okay. So John is engaging in what? In an echoic. That's one of our verbal operants. You just kind of want to know them. Okay. Be familiar with them. Mans, tax, echoics, interverbals. At least know what they are. If I asked you to describe to me how loud your client screamed and how hard he hit his brother, I would be asking you to describe what? Okay, be careful here, right? We're looking for the best answer. The keywords are loud and hard, okay? What are you describing? Are you describing topography? Well, what is topography? Topography is how the behavior looks. Can you tell me how the behavior looks if I tell you my client screamed loud? Well, no, that's not how it looks, right? That's how it sounds. What about how hard he hit his brother? Do we know what hitting looks like? No, we know how hard he did or how the intensity, right, of the hit. We don't know what it looks like. So we're not actually describing topography here. Are we describing function? Are we describing why this behavior occurred? Do we know why screaming occurred? Do we know why hitting occurred? No. We know it occurred. We don't know why. We don't know the function. Magnitude. We are describing magnitude, okay? How intense the behavior is, how loud it is, how hard it is. That all has to do with magnitude. If you say my client screamed loud, you're giving me magnitude. If you said my client headbangs but is very soft, you're giving me magnitude. You are describing magnitude of client screaming and magnitude of hitting brother. Obviously, it's not duration. We're not giving any sort of data or any sort of measurement here. We are simply describing magnitude.